You know, I've had this video in me for a while, and I'm actually pretty happy that I decided to record it after yesterday's Vampire the Masquerade stream over on Arch Warhammer's channel, which, by the way, you should go watch if you haven't already. Arch is DMing. It's me, Sargon, Rags, and Uzulu playing in a Vampire the Masquerade game. Oh, also Kyle's there too. He's a new guy. But we're playing Vampire the Masquerade, a tabletop game. We're playing it online, and it's a lot of fun. It's called In the Claws of the Eagle. In any case, during one of these streams, which by the way happen every Wednesday at 2:30 p.m. EST, we were looking through the Vampire the Masquerade rulebook, the most recent one, the one that we're using for the game, and we found this passage, Advice for Considerate Play. I'm not going to read it all because it's huge, but here's a few choice quotes. One of the best things about role-playing is that you can play someone different from yourself. No gender, ethnicity, sexual preference, disability, class, or position in society is off limits. But remember that this freedom comes with a responsibility to your fellow players. For instance, your table may include people who identify as trans and, whether they plan to transition or not, they will probably not feel comfortable if you portray the trans experience as a simple preference or a condition to be cured, or if you just assume that all of their characters are also trans. Always respect your players' identities. Vampire the Masquerade is not a fascist-friendly game. If you are a neo-Nazi, alt-righter, or whatever it is you're calling yourself nowadays, we urge you to put this book down and call someone who you trust to talk about where you went wrong in your life. That said, kindred culture is inherently monstrous. Part of the political horror of Vampire the Masquerade is surviving in a culture that worships the bad old ways. Large parts of kindred society, especially the Camarilla and the Sabbat, adhere to cults of tradition, ascribe to the idea of humiliating their enemies with overwhelming wealth and force, and praise religious fundamentalism or even pre-modern ideas. Even so, it's pretty easy to steer the game away from totalitarian perspectives. Emphasize the differences between individual vampires. Tell stories about infighting, surprising kindness, and new ideas. Play as thin bloods, caitiff, or anarchs. Portray kindred society in all of its malicious and fascist glory, but let the player characters oppose the system. What if someone wants to play a fascist, though? Or the storyteller wants fascist NPCs? There are plenty of those throughout the World of Darkness. Monsters with pretty faces. They can be a tragic villain, or a former friend who fell. They might be the bourgeois neo-Nazi, the far-right Ventru billionaire, or the Simis eugenicist. Whatever face they present, the player character should be given the satisfaction of redeeming or destroying them eventually. After all, the player characters are something unique and special, something fascists cannot abide. Well, thankfully, in Arch's campaign, we're all playing a bunch of Nazis fighting against Russian communists during World War II. We're German soldiers on the Eastern Front who also happen to be vampires. And the campaign is set largely outside of the influence of the Camarilla, because the Nazis have always had this weird thing going on with the occult. You must remember Indiana Jones, right? Where they go looking for artifacts and stuff to try and help the war effort. We're kind of playing those type of Nazis. So there's basically like a paranormal research unit that the player characters are attached to. And it's honestly a lot of really goofy, schlocky fun. Like, Sargon is literally the villain from Raiders of the Lost Ark. Rags is playing as a gangrel who can shapeshift into a walrus. I'm playing as the obligatory 1,000-year-old vampire lolly. And Uzlu is Jürgen Panzerson, which is just a Nazi retelling of Jordan Peterson. He even has a best-selling book, 12 Rules for Reich. But my point is, Vampire the Masquerade, when it was originally conceived, didn't used to be this. The point of the game, and in fact it even says it in the rulebook elsewhere, the point of the game is that there are no heroes in vampire society. At some point, every single character you encounter has to take blood from somebody. And they might have these societies or these traditions or these methods by which they hold themselves together. But deep down, they're all in some way monstrous. And in fact, that's often the objection to running vampire campaigns, is that there's no heroes. You can't play a heroic character. And this passage actually talks about character archetypes that make complete sense. In the vampire lore, the bourgeois neo-Nazi, the far-right Ventru billionaire. You don't need to know the specifics of those clans to understand what kind of characters they are, and they actually make complete sense within the lore. But because I guess everything is run by social justice nowadays, we need a page in the rulebook saying, yeah, we might have put the stats in the book for some reason, but you shouldn't play as this. Don't do it. The tabletop situation needs to be a friendly and open and welcoming space. I mean, at least according to the BBC.
No offense, but Dungeons & Dragons isn't just for nerds anymore. Not just for a bunch of beardy boys in a basement. It's for everybody and anybody. It's so social, the most social game you have to play, in fact. All you need is a few friends and a dungeon master or game master to kind of run the game and tell you your story. It's this wonderful escapism from real life, like acting or writing, but you're doing it as a group. And it can be really good for people with anxiety, socializing issues, and mobility issues to kind of play somebody else and experiment with their personality. It's got its problems, like most games to be honest, with diversity and inclusion, but there's groups out there working on it. There's teams out there working on it, and like even the creators are working on it.
Okay. I guess it's friendly and opening and welcome to everyone, unless you have a beard, alright? It's not just Vampire that has this problem, though, obviously. Call of Cthulhu shows we need to move past H.P. Lovecraft once and for all. Aside from his history of racism, Lovecraft's ideas are so saturated they're no longer interesting fodder for horror games. I think we're all set on Lovecraft games for a while, though let me just say I'm not talking about Lovecraft's racism, which, let's be honest, is real bad. The dude was racist. Games really need to fall out of love with Lovecraft. I'm not keen on mincing words on this one. H.P. Lovecraft was a racist. Cthulhu game creators acknowledge that Lovecraft was a racist. And you know what? By modern standards, Lovecraft probably was. I haven't looked into it, so I don't know if he is or not, but let's just assume that by modern standards he is. You still can't hold him to those modern standards, though, can you? Because he didn't exist in modern society. He didn't live in modern culture. I mean, if you can have cultural relativism for all of these backwards-ass religions that come in and destroy Western civilization simply on the grounds of it's their culture, then surely you can have temporal cultural relativism, right? I mean, why not? Here, if there actually happens to be any kind of social justice-y types listening to this, I'm gonna blow your mind right now, alright? You cannot judge somebody for living up to your present ideals if they existed in the past, and here's why. Political advancement is exactly like scientific advancement or technological advancement. You have to think about things for a while and iterate on ideas. You have to discover things and create things. You have to invent things. Believe it or not, there was once a point in human history where every single person did not know that people of a different race from them were also humans. And that's something that we had to figure out. And it's actually not fair to judge people in the past who thought that way by modern standards. I mean, would you do it for technology? Would you consider the medieval peasant to be morally deficient because he has no idea what a computer is? Well, no, obviously not. Well, the same goes with political or philosophical discoveries. It's easy for you to think of all the liberal norms we take for granted today as being universal. But they're not universal. We had to discover that shit. And yet here we are. While developing Fate of Cthulhu, we were obligated to reflect on the problematic roots of the source material. We tackle that on page 6. The mythos is definitely worth exploring. It's also worth re-examining. Yes, of course. Make money off of this extremely profitable, available IP, but also make sure to lecture to your audience about how problematic the IP actually is, and how bad it is that they want to enjoy it. Alright, let's see what it says. Fate of Cthulhu is a game that deals with many hard topics, including mental health, systemic abuses of power, and the deaths of huge portions of the human species. Make sure all the players are aware of these things and give enthusiastic consent before they begin playing. Also, H.P. Lovecraft was a racist and an anti-Semite. There, we said it. You know, I don't buy a game, whether it's a video game or a tabletop game or whatever it is. I don't plunk money down on this shit to be virtue signaled at and to be talked down to by people who have no idea what they're actually saying. We are in a strange universe where the radical left has gone so crazy that they've looped back around and basically become the new Jack Chick. If some of you guys are too young to remember him, well, he made these really terrible Christian comics talking about the dangers of Satanism in D&D. But today, Tabletop isn't demonic, it's just problematic. As a quick side note, what's really funny is that in our very obviously Nazi vampire game over on Archer's channel, we discovered all of this stuff in the vampire rulebook weeks before it went viral, but it did go viral. It went viral a couple days ago. If you thought the Fate of Cthulhu entry complaining about Lovecraft was cringe, I present to you Vampire the Masquerade. No fascist! If you're a fascist, you're not welcome to play this game. It's against the rules. If you're reading this and thinking you just call everyone you disagree with a fascist, then you're probably a fascist. Oops, I guess we broke the rule! I do hope our examination of these passages on stream a few weeks ago somehow contributed to this going viral. Or maybe it's our stream itself, because, you know, we generally get between 500 and 1,000 people watching the Vampire the Masquerade sessions every week, and that actually puts us in the realm of one of the more popular vampire streams on the entire internet. For example, you've got Seattle by Night, which is a Vampire the Masquerade campaign run by Penny Arcade. And Penny Arcade's a big deal, you know, they run packs. They invented the idea of the modern webcomic. They were one of the first real content creators on the internet. They run their Vampire the Masquerade campaign on their Twitch channel. They get less viewers than us, both in terms of live viewers and viewers after the fact. Their chat room, as you can probably see, is a lot less rowdy, is a lot less engaged, it has a lot less activity. I don't want to knock these guys because I actually remember reading Penny Arcade quite a bit back in the day when they still had their edge. And PAX is certainly a success in its own right. But it seems like the more popular option is a bunch of shitlords on the internet just playing it on Roll20, you know? You've also got Geek and Sundry's Vampire the Masquerade campaign. This is, if you don't know, Felicia Day's channel, basically. I mean, it's not just her, there's a whole group of them, but it's most well known for Felicia Day's involvement. And they have, you know, over 2 million subscribers, 500,000 followers on Twitch. They have the official endorsement of World of Darkness, you know, the people who create Vampire the Masquerade. And yet their campaign doesn't really seem to be that much popular than ours. It is. Our streams tend to get between 10 and 20k viewers after the fact. Theirs get between 80 and, say, 50 after the fact. So they're definitely more popular than us, but not by a huge amount, despite having all of this backing. And I think it's primarily because, you know, these guys and also the Penny Arcade guys, you know, they're playing very tame campaigns. You know, they're quite afraid to be a little bit edgy, even though it's literally a game about vampires being edgy. Like, this is, if there was going to be a tabletop game where edginess is the norm, it's supposed to be Vampire the Masquerade. By the way, I discovered those games because of this Twitter account, Vancouver by Night. This is another Vampire the Masquerade campaign apparently happening in Vancouver. It seems like a lot of the campaigns just have, like, the name of their city and then by night. And I think that's because the official Vampire the Masquerade rulebook literally says, if you can't figure out a setting, just set it in your hometown and just, you know, just play places that you know, basically. And it's like, well, that's, I guess, but it's not really that fun. This group says that they added games to the list, and it's like, if there are any other games represented that you know of, let me know. #Vamily. I applied our game to be on this list, and they were just like, do you have a link to the Twitch? And shortly after this, they stopped replying to me because I think they figured out exactly what kind of game we were playing. Literally role-playing as Nazis, you guys. Literally. However, it was through this list that I realized most people who play Vampire the Masquerade, especially online, they're social justice warriors themselves. And I don't mean just the big ones like Penny Arcade or Felicia Day with Geek and Sundry. Ah yes, the old chestnut of version 5 not being a true Vampire the Masquerade game because it doesn't cover bad things argument. Yes, one can play a nasty piece of shit in their game. Does that mean we welcome actual fascists, racists, and sexist people? Fuck no. It's the whole Bruja being Nazis shit again. At no point in either text is said that it's okay for these groups of people to exist in the real world, but it does acknowledge their existence. If anything, I admire the writer's wording for actually mocking these scumbags. The World of Darkness is more than the all-nasty shit that end with ists. The World of Darkness is the battle with oneself as a vampire, coming to terms with your condition. It is not a game of how to be offensive and insensitive. Of course, these things can be explored in the games if done properly. They already exist to a very mild extent in the game's canon. But if you really think that anything goes because it's the World of Darkness, piss off. We don't want you in our games. Alright, so, vampires. No problem. Blood-sucking creatures of the night. Okay. Literally cursed by the devil and turned away from all that is good and holy in the world. Completely fine. But don't you dare be a fucking racist. And this isn't me advocating for racism, this is me advocating for common sense. It's me advocating for racism's rightful spot in the hierarchy of evil things. So you want to put racism in your fantasy game, a DM's guide to implementing real-world racism analogies into fictional worlds. By white people, me. For white people, you all. Step 1, don't. There's absolutely no reason for it. Realism? Bullshit. There are elves and dragons and magic. Grittiness? There's plenty of other stuff and tropes to use that don't perpetuate harmful like that. Creating conflict. Again, plenty of other options that don't rely on IRL racism. The only people who should use themes like these in their games are the ones actually affected by it. As a trans person, it can feel super fucking cathartic and awesome to combat and smash transphobic bullshit in game. That's because we decided to handle the topic. On the other hand, when a cis person decides to put transphobia in their game, or a white person with racism, they just end up perpetuating the same harmful shittiness that we try to escape from when playing D&D. So if you're a white DM, unless you have a person of color in your group and they specifically ask you to put something like this in your game so they can handle it, don't. Okay, so by that logic, since we've all been branded as alt-right neo-Nazis, and we're playing original Nazis in our campaign, it's fine, right? I mean, personally, as a Nazi person, it can feel super fucking cathartic and awesome to combat and smash Russian communism bullshit in-game. It's the same logic. It's also, by the way, why the logic is stupid. You are not your character. You know, if you're playing an orc barbarian in D&D, you're not actually an orc barbarian in real life. If you're playing a racist character, you're not actually a racist in real life. I was never a fat black monk, nor was I ever a lolly vampire Nazi. Just because something is portrayed in a fictional setting doesn't mean that the creator of the fictional setting actually espouses that ideology. It's just a game. And I'll say it's just a game to you types, in the same way that I would say it to both Anita Sarkeesian and Jack Thompson when it comes to video games. It's just a fucking game. By the way, for some people, Vampire the Masquerade didn't go far enough in its rebuke of Nazism. If you aren't hiring experts, you'll end up with coded Nazi language and harmful messages in your family Vampire the Masquerade games. Please, this isn't something you can just wing, not with the status of our fandom. There's plenty of people with amazing qualifications that will have a serious critical look at your creations and help you make sure your mechanics, narratives, and systems aren't accidentally condoning Nazi ideals or putting authoritarian regimes on a pedestal. You can't afford to act like a dude in a garage doing a niche product. You're using a multi-million-dollar worth IP that's known for having welcomed Nazis because they're clients. You need to take active measures, else your neutrality will kill us. I'm even going to need to add that your spoken messages and written credos in the family need to be followed by actual action, especially when you don't apologize to victims of your abuser staff. Your disclaimer means nothing if you still support them and promote them. I must insist, Vampire the Masquerade and World of Darkness aren't a couple of dudes in a garage anymore. You have a duty, as content creators, to educate yourself and not be a bigot, not doxing minors, have meaningful and well-designed representation, not put in pet play for shock and edge value. Be mature, but real maturity isn't that. Yes, your NPCs in your society is a clusterfuck of leeches with all of the ism behaviors, but you need to show it as a problem, not as something to glorify. I mean, the whole point is to play as somebody that you're not, right? Like, I'm not Mario. I'm not Link whenever I play those games. I don't believe myself to be them. You're taking on a role. It's a role-playing game. The whole point is that you take on a role that you're not. I think the biggest problem I have with it, though, is that, yes, Vampire the Masquerade was meant to be, like, the edgy tabletop, you know? Because Dungeons & Dragons wasn't really that edgy. Maybe First Edition was, with all, like, the crazy illustrations in the rulebook. But in general, Vampire the Masquerade was like, if you want to be an edgy teen goth shithead, here's the game for you. It's all about being creatures of the night and having, like, inner turmoil and drama and all this BS. But to suddenly turn around and say that you can no longer be edgy in a property designed for edginess just seems to be counterproductive to me. You know, if you were ever going to play ridiculous Nazi vampires, Vampire the Masquerade would be the game to play it in. And then I'm reminded of the film genre Nazi-sploitation, which I think peaked in the 70s or something. And the whole point of that genre of film was that you would basically portray the Nazis in the most schlocky, hilarious, and goofy, but equally also insane and nightmarish fashion that you possibly could. It was equal parts horror and hilarity. And you know, Vampire the Masquerade has a lot in common, tonally at least, with Nazi-sploitation. Like if you were to go back and play the computer game that made the series well known, Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines, you'll pretty quickly notice that it is also full of some pretty goofy nonsense. It is a serious game with amazing music, a tabletop accurate level up system, and a really engaging story, but it also has quirky characters, goofy side quests, and it's generally not afraid to make fun of itself. And it does seem to be this sense of humor that marries Vampire the Masquerade and Nazi-sploitation so well together. They're both internally very serious, but the real-world people who engage with them often do so just for fun, and half of the enjoyment comes from taking the piss out of it. But most importantly of all, nobody thought that Nazi-sploitation portrayed the Nazis in a positive light. And honestly, in my opinion, those movies are great. Not because they're actually like Hitler's true vision of fascism or something, you know, far from it, but it's because it basically parodies the Nazis and it turns them into a joke, which is fundamentally what they are. And if you want to know how you combat Nazis, like the real neo-Nazis that do exist, a few of them that are still kicking around nowadays, is you turn them into a joke. You laugh at them. They don't hold political power anywhere. No one actually cares about their ideas. They're a bunch of fucking losers. And bringing up like the great Nazi scare as if they're somehow relevant, it seems like you're making them a bigger problem than they actually are. And you know what? That gives them power. Especially if you take people who make jokes about Nazis, like say Dankula and his saluting pug, you take them and make them fucking criminals for joking about it. Like, whose honor are you defending when you do that? When you say, no fascists are allowed to play Vampire the Masquerade, you can't depict Nazis in this game, blah, 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 blah. You know, are you defending Hitler's honor? You know, do not be a liberal iconoclast against the sacred Nazi cow. But you know what? It's completely okay because Arch had us all fill out this handy-dandy RPG consent form when we first started playing Vampire the Masquerade, all right? And this thing is just great. You know, you can absolutely put in all the things that trigger you, so you don't even have to be exposed to them, so you can go on living in your hug box for the rest of your life. And you know, there's actually some really good stuff here, all right? Let's look over it, right? So for example, we have the GM name, that would be Arch. That's him. The planned game theme would obviously be Nazis. Nazi. Mark the color that best illustrate your comfort level with the following plot or story elements. Green, enthusiastic consent, bring it on. Yellow, okay if veiled or off stage. Might be okay on stage, but requires discussion ahead of time. Uncertain. Red, hard line, do not include. Okay, well, let's go through this, all right? So, horror. Bugs? They're kind of icky, so no, all right? Blood? Well, it's a vampire game, I understand, but still, no blood in this game, all right? All right. Demons. Well, you know, after the new Doom trailer, I'm kind of triggered by them, so no thanks. Eyeballs, no. I mean, absolutely not. I keep my eyes closed all the time. Gore, no, of course not. Harm to animals? No, because I'm a vegan, obviously. Harm to children? Yes, because I'm also a pedosexual, okay? Rats? You know, I don't know about that one. Spiders? Yes, obviously. And thankfully, they include these extra lines to write other things in. So, for example, I want no Trump, because Trump is the most horrible thing of all. Romance. Fade to black, explicit, between PCs and NPCs, between PCs, and the same with sex. Well, you know what? I identify as an incel, so all of this triggers me, and I want no sex in my game whatsoever. Mental and physical health. Okay, hold on a minute. Cancer, claustrophobia, freezing to death, gaslighting, genocide, heat stroke, natural disasters, paralysis or restraint, police, pregnancy, miscarriage or abortion, self-harm, severe weather, sexual assault, starvation, terrorism, torture, and thirst. Let's add to this just harm. Okay, I don't want any harm of any kind in my vampire game. And hopefully, if I do not consent to any of these things, then what that means is that my character will never take damage and never die. I think that's a good idea. Additional topics? Just because I am being triggered to all hell right now, I do not want any vampires in my vampire game, alright? Because they trigger me. You know, there's just something about them. They're kind of creepy, you know? So, there we go. We are now playing the perfect Vampire the Masquerade game as the developers of the game intended it to be played. Everything is safe, everything is wholesome and accepting and open, and no one can feel triggered about anything, and you know what? Everything's completely fine.